Hello, Behzad. Welcome. Thank you so much for being with us. Everyone, this is Behzad Varamini. He is a professor of nutritional science and physiology at Biola University currently and has a doctorate in human nutrition from Cornell. So very, very qualified to speak on the subject matter. So welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks a lot. Excited to chat.
Awesome. So we have so much to cover. I've been really excited to have this conversation with you in this forum for a while because I think you just have so much awesome insight and knowledge to share. And I would love it if we could just begin by you introducing your philosophy about food, supplements, and nutrition, and the way that the body absorbs nutrients from food differently than it does nutrients from supplements.
Sure. Well, thanks again, Ashley. I love these types of conversations, and this is a really important and big question. I think my philosophy on food, sort of at the highest level, is that food is a gift. Food is made and meant to be enjoyed. It's meant to be eaten in community. And for the longest time as humans, we've known where our food has come from. We've planted and harvested and nurtured the land and our own food. And it's only recently that really because of technology, industrialization, we've been able to, in a good way, get food from all over the world in and out of season. But also we've sort of distanced ourselves as humans from the food manufacturing and the food kind of developing process. And I think that's sort of a bummer because I think there's something really cool about for those of us who are able to growing food and tending to food. I think it kind of develops this rich appreciation and connection to our bodies and what we put into our bodies. So I think my philosophy on food is that food was meant to be enjoyed. You know, we talk about food and often people have feelings of fear or guilt or shame, and that makes sense because we have a contentious relationship with food. We all have different types of views and opinions that are sometimes very strong, and food often is something that divides people.
Right.
But really, I think originally, if you look at the ancient texts and Plato, Socrates, these people met around the table and they broke bread and they had food, and it was really meant to bring people of different backgrounds together to converse. And I just think we need to get back to that a little bit. And so I think food is meant to be enjoyed. It's a gift.
100%. Totally agree.
Yeah. From a biological standpoint, I mean, I think to your question about food versus supplements, we have sort of evolved as a race, or you could think about it as our bodies were made to eat and be nourished by foods, that primarily grow out of the earth or things that, walk on the surface of the earth. That's how we were meant to be nourished. And if you look at nutrients and how they're found in foods, whether it's vitamins or minerals, they're found in this environment where they're not isolated. They're found in what we sometimes call, as scientists, a food matrix. So vitamins and minerals are found bound to other components in foods like proteins and cofactors and often enzymes. And these other factors help nutrients to be absorbed. So what's very different about vitamins and minerals in the supplement form is that they're not from plants and animals that grew in nature. They're from really chemical reactions in the laboratory, and they're made in mass, industrially.
Right.
So there's a difference biologically that we've been able to measure between, vitamin C that's in an apple or an orange and vitamin C that is synthetic. Even though chemically they have the same structure, we've been really good at mimicking the structure of these naturally occurring compounds. We know that when we eat vitamin C from an apple or orange, it's a different ballgame from synthetic. And really 30 or 40 years ago, we first discovered this in a study that came out, I think in the 1990s, where they compared the antioxidant capacity of vitamin C in foods versus supplements. And of course, one of the main things vitamin C does, it's an antioxidant. It scavenges up free radicals.
Right.
So 5 milligrams of vitamin C from an apple had the same antioxidant capacity as 1,500 milligrams of synthetic vitamin C.
Wow. That is incredible. That's something that is like, I think that, this is the supplement versus nutrients from your food discussion is one that, I've personally been having for a long time with a lot of different people, but I've never heard it from the mouth of a scientist who's studied the subject and can really say that, yes, there is a lot of evidence that shows, and there are studies that show the effects are comparable, if not more effective, when deriving nutrients from food versus supplements. So that's really interesting. I've also heard, and tell me if this is pseudoscience or not, but I've also heard that your body just doesn't absorb, like there's a maximum dose, maximum effective dose happening with supplements where you take 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, say, from a supplement, and your body only recognizes a small percentage of that and the rest of it gets flushed out. Is that, how true or false is that?
That is true to a degree. I mean, you also have that, though, to be honest, with foods, you have that to a degree as well.
Mm-hmm.
Our body has, receptors in our gut that take up these vitamins. And it's sort of like a game of musical chairs. So if you have more vitamin compounds than you have receptors, then some vitamin compounds aren't taken up. And like you suggested, they end up being lost, in the urine or in the feces. You just get rid of it. So they never have a chance to get into our body and be used.
Mm-hmm.
But like you suggested, often these megadoses that we talk about, like thousands of milligrams of these nutrients that, to be honest, don't exist in nature. They
Right.
only exist in these supplements, like 5,000% of your daily value of vitamin C. That's like a pile of oranges that you'd never eat in a given day, but we have put that in a pill.
Right.
And like you suggested, in many cases, there may not be a negative effect of that, although there's some cases where there is toxicity of some of the fat-soluble vitamins. But what will happen is you'll just end up not absorbing that and having this sort of false sense of security of, well, I took 5,000% of vitamin C, I'm not going to get sick, or my immune system is good because, I've taken this pile of pills. Whereas really, that vitamin C in a food is not only absorbed at a level that kind of nature meant for it to be absorbed, but you have all these other compounds in fruits and vegetables that work with the vitamin C to enhance its effect and offer protection against cold, viruses, strengthen immunity. So,
right. Okay. So interesting. I love that. Cool. So just going back to really quick, I just had this question pop into my head and I have to ask it. Maybe it's a dumb question, but you said that, the body has receptors that are able to absorb nutrients from food or supplements or whatever you're putting in your body. And if you don't have enough receptors, or if you max out the receptors, for lack of a better term, you're not going to absorb past what the maximum amount is. Is it possible to, or is it even a thing to like get more receptors, or to eat in such a way where the receptors are more open, or is that just a crazy idea?
no, that's a really good question. I mean, I think scientists for a long time have been trying to understand these systems so they can discover how to manipulate them, right? That's the name of the game. Now that we know that vitamins bind to this receptor or to this protein, and we improve somebody's vitamin status, just like you suggested. I mean, you're thinking like a scientist right now. And we improve someone's vitamin and nutrient status by enhancing absorption, right? And one way to do that is increasing the number of receptors. Now, to increase the number of receptors is tricky because we're sort of hardwired genetically to have a certain amount of them.
Gotcha.
But there are other things that we can do to enhance absorption. So one of the things that I tell my students all the time and talk to my friends about is iron. A lot of folks, especially women of childbearing age, are iron deficient. Women more than men because of their physiology. And so people take a lot of iron supplements to counter the lack of iron, which can lead to iron deficiency anemia, which can lead to tired, fatigue, etc. One thing about iron, as it exists in nature, is it exists in foods with other chemicals that enhance its absorption, just like you were sort of alluding to.
Right.
So iron, we know now, whether it's synthetic or whether it's natural, absorbs best in an environment with other acids, and specifically even this vitamin C. So the presence of vitamin C when taken with iron supplements can enhance iron's absorption.
Cool.
Now, most of the time you take an iron supplement, it doesn't say make sure to take it with a glass of orange juice. It just says take with food or water.
Right.
Depending on what you're eating, either that iron supplement with, or even like, a steak, you're really going to affect the amount of that iron that's absorbed. And these are the things that maybe they wouldn't lead you to have steak and orange juice together, but just this understanding kind of shows some of the limitations of sort of individual isolated supplements versus
Right.
eating foods together that can enhance each other's effect.
Right. It's not about one kind of thing. It's important to think about the big picture and how it all works together in the ecosystem of the body and so on and so forth. I love that. That kind of leads me perfectly into my next question for you, which is, can changing what we eat and how we eat it affect more than just, the size and shape of our bodies? How does that affect our overall health, and how can it affect overall health, and how can we use that, I suppose, to enhance our overall health?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the reason that people are so interested in eating right is, for body weight and for body maintenance. And that is important. We do know that excess weight can lead to problems down the line: diabetes, obesity, heart disease. But as suggested, there's so much more to what we eat than just, our weight. And so, I mean, there's so many places to go with this, because you're essentially asking, what does the field of nutrition have to say about, health? And so I think of the example of high blood pressure, which is maybe not something that a lot of folks on this podcast are experiencing. Often you don't get that till your 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond. But about a third of Americans above the age of 40 have hypertension or high blood pressure. So it's a real problem. It's very common. A lot of us have it, and it's not diagnosed. Because go to the doctor, especially men above 40 have a hard time going to the doctor and getting checked out. But my dad, in probably his late 50s, early 60s, had high blood pressure, and he was taking some medicine for that, a very small dose. So at the time, I'm doing my Ph.D. in nutrition, and I'm reading all these studies, and I'm seeing things like flaxseed and beets and garlic, and I'm seeing over and over and over again whole natural compounds in foods reducing blood pressure in these kind of randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials, like clinical trials, at levels that are very similar to what are called beta blockers, or like, the main medicine for blood pressure. So I tell my dad, hey, I Amazon Prime him some stuff. Why don't you try to take some of this stuff and just see what it does for you in a few weeks, few months?
Yeah.
Takes it, goes to the doctor, and they're just like shocked, right? One nurse measures his blood pressure, another one comes in, the doctor comes in. It's like 115. It's like below 120 over 80. That hasn't happened for him in decades.
Yeah.
They're like, what are you doing? It's like, well, my son gave me this stuff. It was actually a garlic pill. So no taste of garlic, but the whole garlic crushed up in a pill.
Wow.
So that got him off of his medication that he was taking for more than 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
So
wow.
I like to present this example, not because, high blood pressure is this thing that we all think about and struggle with. It's not a very sexy thing to talk about. It's just boring. But it does go to show that I think foods have this power beyond weight gain or weight loss to really improve physiology in a measurable way that can reduce the burden of disease. And I think it's an example of a practical way that people can incorporate flaxseed into their diets. I mean, I love beets in every single form. And so beets are really healthy for, hypertension and high blood pressure as well. And garlic, if you don't mind strong breath, garlic is really healthy for high blood pressure and even for anti-cancer and anti-inflammation.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, I love that story. I have a very similar one. Anecdotally, my dad has had very poor nutrition over the years, and he was chronically ill with heart disease, and one of the side effects, I guess you could say, of heart disease and the specific illness that he had was that it starts to affect your kidneys and the way that your kidneys function, and your kidneys are what clean your blood, right? Effectively.
Yes.
So overworked heart, dirty blood, I don't know. So stress on the kidneys, right? So his kidneys were, the functionality of his kidneys were way, 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 way down. And he had a major thing happen in his life where he fell in love and found the love of his life, and he married her, and she was a nutrition nut, and she started making him very healthy food, mostly plant-based, with some like grass-fed meats here and there, some healthy fish here and there, and his kidney function returned to almost 100%. And this is a man who had heart failure for 20 years, and so it's powerful. And he was like, "Oh, I finally get it. Have you heard of avocado toast?" And I was like, "Yes, Dad, I've heard of avocado toast." Welcome to the club. But yeah, I think that this is something that, a lot of people believe and know to be true anecdotally, but it's just so nice to hear that there are studies that back up this information. And I think people don't talk loudly enough about that. And to me, it's so exciting because it's really just everything that we're about at Better Booch is like, food as nutrition and empowering folks to take their health into their own hands, because it really is within your power to preventative nutrition is within your power, right? To an extent. So cool. So you studied aging at the University of Pennsylvania, which is so fascinating, right? Something that, of course, as women, we're all obsessed with. I would love to know, okay, so first of all, what are the most common signs of aging in the body? I guess we can start there. And yeah, what would you say, like, according to your studies, how do you approximate, like, how do you define aging in the body?
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, of course, we can't slow down or stop time, but there are, these biological measurements that we can make that can sort of tell us, how we're doing. And aging, of course, plays a role in that. So there's a lot of things that happen as we age. Our connective tissue, our joints, our blood vessels, they become more rigid. So we have, creaks and pains that we didn't normally have when we wake up, or if we're sedentary for long periods of time. And our hearts, kidneys, and lungs lose capacity. It's thought that the heart loses 1% to 2% of its pumping capacity every year after 30, which is already scary for those of us in our 30s.
Yeah.
And we've all noticed that decreased lung capacity after going up a few flights of stairs in our 30s versus when we were in college. It's a whole different ballgame. You need a moment sometimes after doing a few flights of stairs.
Yeah.
So there's these outward signs, but really those outward signs are a manifestation of what's happening inside. So inside of ourselves, we have this slow accumulation of a few different types of products. One of those are called free radicals, right? We have all heard of this term. So our bodies, when it undergoes normal metabolism, our mitochondria will generate free radicals. These are chemical compounds that bounce around the cell and they do no good. And they run into the DNA, they run into lipids, they run into our proteins, and they damage them. And that happens progressively over a long period of time. And it even happened when we were younger. It's just that when you're younger, your body has the ability to fight those free radicals better as you age. So you don't necessarily make more free radicals, but your defense mechanisms are weakened and they slow down as you age.
Question. Yeah. Why do you have better defense mechanisms when you're younger? Like what is the thing?
That's a great question. Yeah, there's so many reasons why, because I tell my students this, and it sounds kind of morbid, but as you age, everything sort of gets a little more inefficient. Everything gets a little weaker. Everything sort of gets worse physically. Other things get better, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, you're stronger, you're wiser. But on a physical level, we deteriorate very slowly. So the accumulation of these free radicals, normally when we're young, are fought by enzymes and proteins that we have that are encoded by our DNA. As we age, our DNA is not as good at making those enzymes and those proteins that scavenge, we use the word, of those free radicals.
Gotcha.
So our DNA is, these long stretches of, A's, T's, C's, and G's, these letters that are sort of meaningless to most people. At the ends of those DNA molecules, we have these things called telomeres. And if you think about a shoelaces on the very end have these caps, right? A little plastic cap that prevents the shoelace from sort of coming apart. As we age, every time our cells divide, those telomeres naturally shorten. And as they shorten, our DNA is more prone to oxidative damage from these reactive oxygen species and other things that are harmful that accumulate in our body. So as the DNA starts to get less and less sort of good at defending itself, the telomeres shorten, you start to have mutations. You start to have inefficiencies in the body where now you can't fight those free radicals in the same way you could in your, say, 20s and 30s.
Right.
So there's a lot that goes into it, but that's sort of what's called the free radical theory of aging. It's a very Google-friendly term. That's one of the biggest theories of why we age.
Wow.
And there's a lot of other theories, but that's sort of the common theories of what I'm explaining is the free radical theory of aging.
Right, right. Okay, so it would stand to reason that antioxidants become more important as we get older, to assist those telomeres in doing their job, right? Okay, cool. So what can we do? What are some of the things that can cause us to, so I guess two questions. What are some of the things that can cause us to age more quickly that can, work against us? And then how can what we eat and the lifestyle, like, is there anything we can do to combat that and help it along?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think we know some of the things that can cause us to age are, UV light, smoking, being sedentary, stress. There's even a lot of interesting studies from a psychological or sociological point of view where they looked at people who later in their life had strong bonds in their community.
Mm-hmm.
And they saw that those people lived 8 to 12 years longer than people who were in isolation.
Right. It's a
Which is
blue zone thing, right?
absolutely, yeah. And so, I
Yeah.
mean, as much as I think nutrition is important, I mean, we are holistic beings. And so you can eat a really healthy diet, but studies show if you don't have community and strong bonds and relationships, especially as you get older,
Mm-hmm.
people just sort of have a little bit less reason to sort of live, and they're not as resistant when things like cancer and heart disease come up. They die a lot sooner than people who have a really rich community. So there's sort of this nutritional and psychological and sociological part of it as well. But of course, things like poor diet and being sedentary can accelerate aging. And what we mean when we say accelerate aging is diseases that sometimes you don't see until your 60s, 70s, and 80s can start to happen earlier and earlier. And the earlier we have those diseases, the less our lifespan is. So that's called sort of accelerated aging. But I think so much of it is sociological, psychological, stress, as well as eating right, being fit, exercising.
Right, of course. Okay, so one of the things that we talked about, okay, so I would love to dive into like practical takeaways. How can we when it comes to aging and what you studied, what are some of the what are some of the things that you found in your work would, besides like what everybody knows, right? Diet and exercise. What are some of the things that you guys worked on and studied, and explored in terms of slowing down the aging process, or not reversing the aging process? That's kind of more of a beauty term, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So, like we said at the University of Pennsylvania, when I was studying aging, we were looking at specific compounds that were naturally occurring
Mm-hmm.
that slow down aging or extend life in mice.
Mm-hmm.
So, before you do the studies in humans, you got to do them in mice. You got to make sure it doesn't, kill the mouse.
Right.
So this compound that we were working on is been very hot in the past 10, 15 years. It's called resveratrol.
Mm-hmm.
So you can now buy it, over the counter, Amazon Prime, you can get it. It's essentially a compound from grapes and grape leaves
Mm-hmm.
and skins, okay, not
Mm-hmm.
grape, the skin of the grape actually.
Mm.
So this compound was found when it was given to mice that were on a high-fat diet, sort of mimicking the McDonald's fast food type diet. These mice lived 30 or 40% longer when they were given this compound versus when they were just on the high-fat diet and they weren't given this compound. So
Mm.
there was a lot of promise around this compound initially in the early 2000s. And the person at Harvard Medical School who discovered this compound, patented the compound and started a company, and his net worth, shot through the roof. And it was like a $400 or $500 million compound essentially that he discovered. He was on Oprah, 60 Minutes. I mean, very famous sort of guy named Dr. Sinclair at Harvard. So
Right.
that compound led to not only this sort of race to discover these fountain of youth type compounds in the early 2000s, but the question was really, what is the compound doing in the cell? And can we manipulate that directly? Because the erythritol compound was initially promising, but then, like a lot of other things, it sort of petered out and there were complications with the studies.
Okay.
So what we discovered the compound doing in the cell, this is a long answer to your short question, is
No, I love it. I love it. Keep going.
it was mimicking fasting.
Hmm.
Right? So when this compound was given to mice, even though the mice were eating a lot of high fat food, like 60% of their calories, these mice was from fat, which is even a lot if you're on a keto diet. That's a lot. But if you looked at these mice and their tissues and you looked at their muscles under the microscope and you looked at their mitochondria, it looked like these mice were fasting. And it almost looked like they were sort of in this semi-starvation state. So what people discovered that was really interesting is that the compound mimics fasting. And so we've known for a long time, and fasting and intermittent fasting is again very hot now. But when we abstain from foods, our physiological and genetic sort of program shifts. We shift to a mode that's meant for survival, probably because our earliest ancestors, cavemen back in the day, were hunting wildebeest out in the wild, not eating as regularly as we do here now today. They needed biological mechanisms to sort of stay alive throughout these very long periods of fasting. And what those mechanisms did was those fasting mechanisms will slow down physiology, which actually makes less reactive oxygen species. Their bodies would prefer to burn fat. Right? These things all sound very good. Like, we all want to burn more fat. We all want less reactive oxygen. And it's not to say that these sort of cavemen ancestral people lived longer. They often died, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s because they would a wild animal would eat them, or they would have some sort of bacterial infection. There were no antibiotics back then. But the fasting really helped humans sort of survive and thrive in times that were very nutrient limiting. So this resveratrol compound activated some of the same physiological mechanisms as fasting. And if you can take a compound and eat what you want, I mean, that's sort of the dream, right? So that's why there was a lot of buzz around this compound. And really, long story short, the compound has by itself not proven to be as effective as just good old-fashioned fasting is.
Intermittent fasting. Wow. Okay, so that's interesting to hear that side of intermittent fasting, because of course this is something that most people have probably thought about or maybe played around with. I have heard that one of the reasons that, and tell me if this is again like kind of pseudoscience or not, but I have heard that the digestive fire requires a lot of energy to fuel. And so when you give the digestive system a break, you enable the cells in the body to repair themselves more efficiently and that helps your body kind of protect against, it helps your immune system, it helps inflammation, it helps your immune system, it helps the body more effectively protect against outside risk like disease and free radicals and all of that kind of stuff. Is that how true or false is that?
You are reading some solid stuff. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Mostly truth there. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things that happens with fasting, like you suggested, is it gives our cells a break, right? Our cells are normally in one of two states. They're normally sort of in this taking up nutrient state because you just ate a meal, and then storing some of those nutrients, burning other nutrients. They're sort of in a state of where they're working, or they're in a state of sort of rejuvenation and rebuilding, like you suggested. So actually, the study in mice that came out shortly after the resveratrol stuff, maybe in 2018 on fasting, they had sort of three different groups, and it goes to exactly the point that you just mentioned. They had one mouse group where they had them have food round the clock, and mice like us we eat for about 12 hours. We generally eat breakfast at 7, 8, 9 in the morning, and if you're like me, you're eating almost up until when you go to bed. Mice had access to food 24/7. There was another group of mice that was only given access to food for 8 hours, and then another group that was only given food for 4 hours. And what's interesting is the mice learn to eat about the same number of calories. So even if they were given food for about 4 hours, they kind of just engorged themselves with a whole day's worth of food. And they looked at these mice over time. And
Yeah.
all of the measures of health, aging, free radicals that we talked about kind of mark health and aging
Mm-hmm.
were much less pronounced in the 4 hour fasted group, sort of in the middle in the 8 hour, and then the 24-hour access to food group, sort of a normal mouse that had a normal lifespan and sort of the normal level of disease, cancer, fat, adiposity, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
same amount of calories distributed over a narrower window of time gave, like you suggested, more time for the body to not be continuously exposed to food, but enable long periods of time for what are called just repair and maintenance mechanisms that are absent, cannot be activated when you're taking in calories. And
Wow.
like you said, even the immune system will make white blood cells at an extremely fast rate in a fasted state, whereas in a continual state of nutrient intake, we make white blood cells much more slowly. But when we're fasted, we make them like 10, 100 times faster for as far as white blood cells and antibodies as
Right.
opposed to when we're eating food. So we
Wow.
really kickstart and jumpstart, our immune system and a lot of other systems of our body from just sort of a short, really a manageable, just eat over an 8 hour period, don't eat
Right.
for the other 16 type of intermittent fast.
Right. So just for anyone who maybe hasn't um or hasn't tried intermittent fasting, a great way to start would be just liquids until lunch, right?
Yeah.
And have your last meal at or before 8 o'clock so that you get, a 16-hour period of, and if you have to break and have a snack at 10, no biggie, right? But if you can get a 14 to 16-hour uh, fast in there, that's a really great way to start playing around with intermittent fasting and seeing how you feel.
Yeah. And I keep talking about mice, but what you just suggested, I mean, they've done those sorts of studies in humans too. And they've
Mm-hmm.
looked at how fasting can reduce blood pressure, reduce oxidative stress, clear up people's skin. I mean, there's a lot of stuff on fasting that, of course, you might not see the results after one day of fasting. Usually
Sure.
in studies, people are fasting for a number of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
You're healthy and you don't need medical supervision and you can fast. It's really a good exercise to try to incorporate.
Yeah, that's great. Cool. Okay, so while I have you, I have to ask you about my favorite subject, of course, which is gut health. Um, can you can you kind of walk us through why having a healthy gut is important? I think that gut health is kind of like they're buzzwords these days. But I think what's missing is the why. Like, why should we care?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's a great topic. And like you said, very hot topic these days.
Hmm.
The gut is so critical, and for such a long time, it's been neglected. In a
Hmm.
way, I'm glad that there's so much sort of buzz around the gut.
Hmm.
But like anything else, we have to take everything with a grain of salt. The gut is one part of, this whole integrated system that we have inherited from our parents, which is our wonderful bodies. So
Right.
the gut is important for a number of reasons. One is it's where, these nutrients that we talked about, where they come in.
Hmm.
So a healthy gut will promote and enhance the absorption of nutrients.
Right.
I know we're going to get into a little bit about what constitutes a healthy gut, but of course, the bacteria that make up that gut are actually responsible for breaking down a lot of nutrients that we can't break down through our own human cells.
Hmm.
By having a healthy gut, we actually promote healthy gut bacterial populations,
Gotcha.
help us to break down nutrients that we can then absorb better. And as our gut makes up so much of also our immune system, about 70 or 80% of our immune system cells live in our gut.
Whoa.
There's a really strong connection between our white blood cells, what they're up to, what they're learning based on
Hmm.
what we eat, right? They're
Hmm.
always actually sampling what we eat and they're learning, okay, this is friendly, this is not so friendly, so that we don't become sick from something that we eat that maybe was, a little rotten or not healthy, etc.
Yeah.
So a lot of things happening at the level of the gut with the immune system. There's a lot of things happening at the level of the gut connecting to the brain, because there's so many neurons that go from the brain to the gut. So the gut is really interacting with so many different other systems of the body, which makes it really important and central in overall health.
Hmm. Right. And aren't there certain neurotransmitters that are produced in the gut that help carry information from your digestive tract to your brain?
I have read recently that I've read 75 and I've also read 90% of the serotonin in our body is made in the gut.
Wow.
And we have some really important connections between our gut and our brain directly. So the brain has these 12 really important nerves called cranial nerves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're so important. Like one goes to the heart, so that's pretty important,
Yeah.
and then you have one that goes to the gut, and it's sort of the largest one called the vagus nerve. The
Mm-hmm.
largest nerve coming out of the brain, second to the spinal cord, goes right to the gut.
Wow.
And so we have this whole nervous system that we call the enteric nervous system that's actually made up of more neurons than are found in the spinal cord that just control and coordinate the movements of the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk two ways. Brain talks to the gut, gut talks to the brain, right? We've all felt butterflies or kind of uneasy or nauseous when we're nervous or scared.
Right.
That's brain talking to the gut. Okay,
Wow.
we look the other way around when we have gastrointestinal disturbances and we're unhealthy, when our gut's unhealthy. That affects our mood and our memory and our brain, like you suggested, because a lot of neurotransmitters are originally made in the gut.
Right. Wow. Wild how that all works together. Um, cool. Okay. So what do we do with that information? How can we support a healthy gut?
Yeah. Well,
What can we do?
yeah, like a lot of things, I think supporting the healthy gut comes through this sort of holistic approach.
Mm-hmm.
There's some really interesting studies recently that even show that sleep and getting a proper amount of sleep can promote a healthy gut.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of me is like, that's interesting, but part of me is also like, of
Right.
course we need to sleep.
Right.
Like we talked about a few minutes ago, as we sleep, our cells, they rejuvenate themselves. They make new proteins and they make new membranes. They strengthen and reinforce themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not sleeping, then they don't have the ability to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But really, from sort of a nutrition standpoint, the foods that we eat nourish not only all the cells of our body, but they nourish our gut.
Right.
Our guts like specific foods and are nourished particularly by specific foods like fiber. So soluble and insoluble fiber. These are foods that our guts need for general health. And they're not only for our gut cells, but like we suggested, they promote good bacteria and their sort of growth in the gut. And when the good outnumber the bad, sort of that's where you want to be.
Absolutely. Right. Okay. So probiotics are good pro gut bacteria, right?
Yeah.
So probiotics and I mean, do probiotic supplements, I mean, what's the difference between like a probiotic supplement and getting probiotics from something fermented like kombucha or kimchi or, sauerkraut?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously we want to put as much good in as possible to support that. But what is, I was always curious about that because the FDA, there isn't a lot of regulation, I guess, around there is a lot of regulation around the claims that you can make about probiotics, of course. And the only recognized probiotics by the FDA are lactobacillus coagulans. And but of course there's billions of other strains and varieties. So I was just curious kind of what your philosophy there around like, is it effective to take a supplement of lactobacillus coagulans? And is it more effective or less effective or around the same to get those from probiotic foods, or, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. In some ways, I think it's similar, although we're learning more about probiotics constantly.
Mm-hmm.
The take is similar as far as what we know with supplements versus foods.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that this specific lactobacillus strain has been so popular and sort of has this sort of stamp of the FDA is because it's one of the first strains that was really well studied in human trials.
Gotcha.
And the FDA is looking for a few things. The main thing they're looking for is safety. And
Yeah.
so what's been shown with this strain is that it's safe even at really high doses. The second thing they're looking for, and the burden of proof isn't quite as high, is just efficacy.
Right.
So in a lot of these probiotic trials, they look at bloating, gastrointestinal cramping, discomfort, digestion.
Mm-hmm.
So this lactobacillus strain has been promising, whereas others maybe haven't been as promising. So I think what the mistake that we've sort of made with probiotics, sort of like what we did with supplements 20, 30 years ago, is we've rushed in and found individual strains that, again, you think about foods, like you suggested, you eat kimchi or fermented food or kombucha, or you even eat fruits and vegetables, which, this may gross some people out, but you buy fruits and vegetables, you wash them, and you eat them. There's a lot of bacteria that are still on those fruits and vegetables.
Right.
They're mostly good for you.
Right.
So the types and the strains that you find in foods that are fermented and fresh are, like you suggested, thousands of different strains.
Mm-hmm.
And we're learning, sort of like nutrients, that it's more about the way that these strains interact with each other. And it's more about diversity of gut bacteria than it is one particular strain.
Right.
So that diversity comes often from foods. I mean, you can take probiotics that have 10 or 12 strains, and you might be like, that's a lot of strains, right? A kale leaf, literally at Whole Foods, even after you come home, wash it, it's got probably hundreds or thousands of strains of probiotics in there.
Wow.
And so we know that more strains generally are good. Of course, there's some strains that are sort of pathogenic, like some E. coli strains are very bad for us. But we know that the key to gut health is diversity, right? Diversity of nutrients and food. So like you suggested, these fermented foods offer diversity where an individual strain doesn't. And so I'm always going to still push, no matter what studies might come out, I'm going to push, go for the whole fermented food where you get other health benefits as well, but also you get the diversity of organisms that you just can't get with a supplement.
Right. Gosh, I love that. The key to the gut, what did you say? The key to gut health is diversity?
Absolutely. Yes.
I love that. I'm writing it down. Yeah, that's great. Cool. So I think also, in the conversation that we had just before this, you said something that I really loved, which was, nature put probiotics in these fermented foods. And similarly to nature putting, vitamin C in an orange, it's important to consider the environment in which those things exist when thinking about bioavailability and absorption and nutrient levels that are recognized by your body. So I love that. That's great.
I think Mother Nature is just the best teacher. I mean, we have so much to learn just from observing how Mother Nature does things.
100%. Yes. I mean, and still, I love that I really think it's great that, that nutrition and science are coming together more often nowadays. I mean, I don't have a scientific background myself, so I don't really know exactly when these types of studies kind of started to originate, but it seems more prevalent now than it ever has been before. I mean, certainly, when our parents were being raised, they were being raised in the age of canned food and preservatives and the things that the things that were valued in the food source, in the food industry were convenience and how long does it last, right? And how many people can I feed at once? So I think it's really wonderful to see the shift back towards, like you said earlier, farming and growing food and, just more focus on nutrients that already exist in food, that are already available to us, if we only just know how to use them.
Yeah.
So I love that. So what else can we do? I guess, like, what would be some takeaways that you would like to impart on the listeners before we sign off?
Yeah. I think, two things. I think, like you suggested, Ashley, there are no shortcuts, right? When I think of a multivitamin or a multimineral or even a probiotic supplement, I think what we try to do is what we did with the food industry, in the past 100 years of industrialization of food. We tried to make things more convenient, more economical, and more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I am for those things. I love that year round I can have kiwis and blueberries and stuff
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't grow regionally year round. I think some of those things have been good.
Yes.
But when we try to take what nature has given us, manipulate it, repackage it, we just can't expect that we're going to have the same outcome. So I think we have to understand we have everything sort of that we need from the earth, and that the earth is the best sort of teacher for how to nourish.
Mm-hmm.
So not only when it comes to nutrition and whole foods, but I sort of talked about community and the sociological studies that are becoming more and more popular in the field of nutrition,
Mm-hmm.
that as people have others to eat with, they tend to eat healthier food and make food
Mm.
more, right? Versus
Yes.
when they're in isolation. And that's one of the things that I think has been tough about COVID in particular, is that
Right.
with so many people in isolation, that while the virus has been, taking people's lives and making people sick as well, it's been really hard, I think, mentally and just for us to be kind of cut off from our community. And I think, unfortunately, there's going to be some ramifications there, but I think the solution is to try to, get with people however you can. My wife and I will sometimes have meals sort of with people over Zoom, and we're eating, and we just try to
Yeah.
recreate community where we've had some of those limitations. So I think that the diversity of foods and compounds in nature are where sort of we need to go. And I think that's been something that consumers have brought to the forefront. I think
Yes.
for the most part, companies haven't been leading on that. I think consumers have demanded change. And I think folks that have been in the food and beverage business that have been wise to that change have really stepped up and are providing things that are challenging the status quo.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the message is just to be holistic, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's not just sleep and exercise and food and community. I think health and our whole beings are just a multifactorial meshing of all these things. And I think true health comes when we're able to consider all of these as sort of who we are, and not to get super, mystical about it, but I think, there's more to life than just sort of the what chemicals go into our body and what go out. I mean, we're so complex and fascinating that I think it
Mm-hmm.
really takes a holistic approach and a community for us to live healthy, balanced.
Mm-hmm. Ah, I love that. That is so in line with also kind of like our philosophy about health, which is that it's a continuum, and all all the things you do contribute to the overall flow. And the more you put in going the right direction, the stronger the flow is. So if you like whatever, if you have a fun night and you end up at a fast food place at 1 a.m, it's not going to throw you off that flow because you have so many strong things going for you, right?
Yes.
So yeah, it's all of it together. So I love that. I think that's a perfect place to end. Where can folks keep up with you and your work?
Great. Well, they can follow me, I guess, on LinkedIn. There's a few projects that I am working on,
Hmm.
sort of along the lines of sort of a holistic way to enrich our bodies with vitamins and minerals that is anti sort of synthetic vitamins.
Hmm.
So maybe we'll post some of that stuff in the social and I can send that to you, Ashley. But there are a few projects I'm excited about.
Hmm.
And I think as long as we just keep the conversation going and think
Yep.
about what are ways to integrate health and healthy choices into sort of everyday life,
Hmm.
I think we're on the right track. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Oh my gosh, such a great conversation. I really, really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for being with us.
Okay. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.